A man sits on the slope of the Mount of Olives, in the fading light of a Tuesday afternoon. Most people assume they understand exactly what is happening here. You read Matthew 25, and you see a cosmic sorting hat. A divine courtroom. Brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. This is not a parable about charity. It is an incarnation. He is declaring that the creator of the cosmos has stitched his own identity into the bodies of the forgotten. The divine presence is not locked behind the heavy veil of the Holy of Holies. Surrounded by hammered gold and the smell of burning incense, it has relocated. It has moved into the gutters. It is bleeding by the side of the Jericho road. It is shivering in the Roman cell to encounter God. You do not look up into the clouds. You look down into the dirt. The ultimate metric of the universe is not how well you can articulate the nature of the divine, but whether you can recognize the divine when it shows up at your door asking for a cup of water. But the detail that makes this scene truly terrifying is how the people in the story actually respond. Because both the righteous and the wicked look back at the king and answer with the exact same question. The king sits on the throne. The decree is spoken. And a wave of profound confusion washes over the entire crowd. Look at the dialogue in Matthew 25, where the faithful go to the right and the wicked are sent to the left. You assume the criteria for this separation is what you believe. The sheep on the right are stunned. They ask, "Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you something to drink?" The goats on the left are equally shocked. They ask the exact same question, "Lord, when did we see you hungry or thirsty, or a stranger, or needing clothes, or sick, or in prison, and did not help you?" Both sides are completely blind to what they have done. Both sides missed the divine disguise. The righteous did not feed the hungry man because they thought he was the Messiah testing them. They fed him because his ribs were showing. The wicked did not ignore the prisoner because they knew it was God locked in the cell. They ignored him because the prison floor smelled of sickness and rust. And they had more important religious duties to attend to. Righteousness is not a calculated transaction. It is an unconscious reflex. If you are keeping score, you have already lost. If you are doing charity to build a religious resume, if you are handing out bread so that a watching deity will write your name in a ledger, you are playing a game the kingdom of heaven does not recognize. The goats on the left would have gladly fed the king if the heavens had parted, if angels had blown trumpets, if the Son of Man had appeared in blazing glory demanding a cup of water. Every single person on the left. You assume it is about what theology you subscribe to, what denomination you belong to, or what prayer you prayed at an altar when you were 12, would have scrambled to find a well. They would have fought each other in the dirt for the chance to hand him a drink. But God did not arrive with a trumpet blast. He arrived in the smell of a soiled tunic. He arrived in the hollow cheeks of a starving traveler. He arrived in the cold grit of a Roman dungeon. Because the goats were only looking for a monarch, they stepped right over the beggar. Their religion was entirely upward. Their vision was entirely vertical. They spent their lives scanning the clouds for a savior while ignoring the image of God bleeding on the pavement at their feet. The sheep, on the other hand, were not trying to earn a crown. They simply saw pain. They felt the bite of the winter wind, saw a shivering body, and handed over a heavy wool coat. They saw dry, cracked lips, and poured out cold water. They did not see God. They saw a human being. And, in the mathematics of heaven, that is the exact same thing. The true state of your heart is not revealed by how you treat the people who can save you. It is exposed by how you treat the people who can offer you absolutely nothing in return. And that undeniable reality is what drives the final scene in the throne room. The Son of Man takes his seat. The angels gather. A silent and terrifying army of light framing the judgment seat. But if you look closer at the cultural reality of a first-century pasture, at the specific Greek words Jesus chooses for this act of separation, the dust settles across the vast, assembled masses of every nation, every empire, and every generation that has ever existed, standing shoulder to shoulder. In the blinding glare of the divine presence, There is no heavy wooden gavel. There are no scrolls of doctrine being unrolled and read aloud. The king looks to the left. He looks at the ones who stepped over the hungry, the ones who complained about the smell of the sick, the ones who locked the prison doors and threw away the keys to protect their own comfort. He speaks a decree that drops into the absolute silence of the crowd with terrifying finality. Depart from me, you who are cursed, into the eternal fire prepared for the devil and his angels. This is not a sudden, unpredictable eviction. It is a cosmic ratification. Notice exactly who that fire was designed to hold. Jesus explicitly states it was prepared for the devil and his angels, entities of pure rebellion, beings who chose to consume rather than to love. When human beings choose that same path, when they shut their eyes to the suffering at their feet and build heavy stone walls to keep the broken out, they are aligning their own nature with the consuming fire of isolation. You start to see something the standard courtroom reading completely misses. The final judgment is not a test of your theology. It is an audit of your vision. The king is simply granting them the reality they spent their entire lives pursuing. Hell is not a torture chamber designed by a petty tyrant. It is the natural destination of a soul that has curled entirely inward. The shepherd has simply drawn the horizon line. If a life is spent demanding to be separated from the sick, the immigrant, and the poor, the king honors that demand. He grants an eternity entirely separated from the very people they refused to touch, and by extension, separated from the God who hid himself among them. But when the king turns to the right, the atmosphere of the throne room shifts entirely. He does not offer a polite commendation for their rigorous temple attendance. He does not congratulate them on maintaining their ritual purity. He says, "Come, you who are blessed by my Father, take your inheritance, the kingdom prepared for you since the creation of the world." He invites the merciful to step into a reality that is older than the dirt they are standing on. The cosmos itself was architected for the compassionate. The foundations of the earth were laid with the specific intention of housing those who bend down to lift up the broken. The righteous inherit the universe not because they solved a theological puzzle, but because their hands looked like the hands of the king. Jesus was not offering a theological riddle to be decoded. He was diagnosing a profound human blindness. The gates of the kingdom are not unlocked by a flawless theology. They are thrown open by a bruised hand. The verdict of the throne room seals eternity, dividing the flock in the fading light. But the true danger of this parable is that we treat it merely as a prophecy of a distant, apocalyptic future, completely missing the staggering claim it makes about the ground you are standing on right now. If you are in a season where your faith feels like a heavy, exhausting stack of textbooks, Matthew 25 is a terrifying and beautiful place to stand. You might be carrying the weight of a dozen theological debates in your head right now. You might be terrified that you hold the wrong view of the end times, the wrong view of communion, or the wrong view of justification. You listen to the podcasts. You read the heavy books. You argue in the comment sections, trying to defend the honor of a God you assume is grading you on your intellectual accuracy. But Jesus bypasses the entire library. He walks straight past the scholars and points to a cup of cold water. Here is the part I keep coming back to. The sheep and the goats looked exactly the same in the daylight. They both walked the same limestone hills. He was exposing a terrifying truth about how easy it is to stand in the presence of the divine and not even blink. They both kicked up the same dust. They both heard the shepherd's voice. To the untrained eye of a passing traveler, they were one flawless, unified community. But when the sun dropped and the freezing wind swept across the Judean hillside, the truth of their nature was exposed. The shepherd did not alter their biology in that moment. He simply drew a horizon line aphorizo around what they had already become. Your life is drawing that line right now. Look at your daily routine. You wake up. You grip the cold steering wheel of your car. You pass the man standing on the concrete median, holding a piece of cardboard. You sit under the harsh fluorescent lights of a hospital waiting room, next to a neighbor who is terrified. Every single day, you are surrounded by the Elakistos, the smallest, the insignificant, the one society has decided to erase. And every time you encounter them, a horizon line is being established in the dirt. Righteousness is not a theological exam you cram for. It is a reflex you cultivate. It is the automatic reaching out of a hand. When you see someone shivering, it is the pouring of a drink. It is the willingness to step into the stale smell of a prison cell. Simply because you were looking for a king but you stepped over a beggar. He is naming a disease that most people do not even realize they have, or the sterile silence of a hospital room, and simply sit in the dark with someone who is hurting. If you only look for God in the vaulted ceilings of a sanctuary, you will miss him. He is not hiding behind the stained glass. He is waiting in the gutter. But the profound weight of this parable does not just stop at your daily commute. Because when you pull back and look at the entire narrative of Scripture, you see this exact same boundary being drawn from the very beginning. Picture the scene on the Mount of Olives one last time. The sun has finally dropped behind the temple walls. The evening wind is freezing, and the disciples pull their heavy wool cloaks tight against their chests. The shepherd has finished speaking. The twilight flock has been divided, and a terrified quiet settles over the dirt. He sits on a hillside to explain the end of the cosmos, and he talks about a cup of cold water. A shepherd steps into a twilight pasture, and a biological reality becomes an eternal division. A horizon line is drawn in the dirt, and the true nature of a flock is permanently exposed. And the cure he offers changes how you will read every interaction you have tomorrow morning. The righteous feed a starving traveler, and they inadvertently sustain the creator of the universe. The wicked step over a shivering prisoner, and they step over the very king they claim to worship. The gates of the dark open for the selfish, and they receive the isolation they always demanded. The gates of the kingdom swing wide for the merciful, and they inherit a world built entirely for compassion. One horizon line. One king in disguise. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the absolute shock in that courtroom. Both sides of the throne look back at the king with total confusion. The righteous did not know. They were touching the divine when they handed over the coat. They just saw someone whose ribs were showing. The greatest eternal reality is not a theology you master. It is a human being you refuse to ignore. If you are in a season where you feel completely disconnected from God, stop looking up. Stop trying to find him in the heavy theological books or the perfectly polished church service. Look down. Look at the people society has. To feel the weight of what actually happens in this scene, you have to leave the theological courtroom behind, pushed to the absolute margins. The elachistos. He promised he would be there. He stitched his own identity into their hunger and their thirst. If this opened something in you, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who is exhausted by religion, but still looking for Jesus. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts, and may the God who has hidden himself in the broken, forgotten spaces of this world, to give you the eyes to see him there, and the hands to meet him when he asks for a drink. Looking down at the sprawling stone architecture of the temple complex, dust hangs heavy in the air from hundreds of thousands of pilgrims gathering for the Passover festival. You have to step out of the stained glass sanctuaries and walk down into the grit of a Judean hillside at twilight. Because the detail that unlocks the entire parable is hiding in plain sight, right at the feet of a first-century shepherd. The ink on the parchment scrolls of the first century reveals an obsession with boundaries. The religious leaders of Jesus' day spent their lives drawing lines in the sand to separate the pure from the impure, the righteous from the sinner, the acceptable from the outcast. You knew who belonged to God by watching who they refused to eat with, whose houses they refused to enter, and how carefully they washed the dust from their hands before breaking bread. Righteousness was largely a system of contamination avoidance. The modern Western mind has its own version of this boundary drawing. Though ours is usually intellectual rather than physical, we have spent centuries building massive cathedrals of doctrine, writing libraries full of systematic theology, and debating the exact mechanics of salvation. We tend to picture the final judgment as a grand theological exam with a multiple-choice sheet. Did you believe the right things? Did you assent to the correct doctrinal statements? But the man sitting on the Mount of Olives shatters that entire framework. The evening wind smells of wood smoke and crushed olive leaves. He is not teaching in a synagogue. He is not debating Pharisees in a crowded public square. When Jesus describes the gathering of all nations, he does not hand out a doctrinal questionnaire. He does not ask anyone to recite a creed. He asks about bread. He asks about water. He asks about the heavy iron doors of a Roman prison cell and the rough wool of a winter coat. The kingdom of heaven is not an examination of your doctrine. It is an audit of your proximity to pain. When you look closely at the 6 specific metrics, Jesus lists feeding the hungry, giving drink to the thirsty, welcoming the stranger, clothing the naked, caring for the sick. Visiting the prisoner, you notice something profound. None of these actions require a seminary degree. None of them require wealth, political power, or institutional influence. A child can hand a cup of cold water to a thirsty traveler. The list is fiercely, intentionally ordinary. And yet, in the ancient world, these specific groups, the naked, the sick, the imprisoned, the foreign, were often viewed as cursed by the divine. If a man was sick or chained to a prison wall, the common assumption was that his hidden sins had finally caught up with him. To associate with him was to risk taking on his shame, his social stigma, and his ritual impurity. The religious elite believed that God was found in the pristine courts of the temple, amidst the smell of burning frankincense and the chanting of the Levites. He is sitting quietly in the dirt with his closest friends. 2 days before his hands will be nailed to a piece of wood, Jesus pulls the presence of God out of the temple and places it in the gutter. He insists that the divine is hiding in the very places humanity tries hardest to ignore, waiting to see who will stop walking and look down. It is a massive cognitive shift, relocating the center of gravity of the entire Jewish faith from the altar to the alleyway. But to understand exactly how this separation happens, you have to look closely at the metaphor he chooses to carry it. Most of us read the words sheep and goats and picture 2 completely different creatures. We imagine a fluffy white sheep and a scruffy, horned goat, easily distinguishable from a mile away. But that is not what a Judean hillside actually looked like. The sun drops behind the limestone hills of Judea. The evening wind begins to bite. A shepherd stands on a rocky slope, leaning on a heavy wooden staff. At his feet, a massive flock grazes in the twilight. Look closely at the animals. If you are expecting a clear division of fluffy white sheep on one side and scruffy, horned goats on the other, you are looking at the wrong continent. First-century Palestinian Awasi sheep and Syrian goats do not look like a children's picture book. They share the same dark, mottled coloring, and he begins to talk about the end of the world. He speaks of 10 bridesmaids waiting in the dark with oil lamps. They carry the same heavy, drooping ears. From 20 yards away, in the fading light, they are visually identical. They graze the same rocky slopes. They drink from the same shallow pools. They kick up the same dust. They follow the same voice. To the untrained eye of a traveler passing on the road, it is just one massive, undivided flock. There are no labels. There are no distinct lines drawn in the dirt. They are not 2 separate camps. They are one mingled mass. But the shepherd knows. As the temperature drops, the biological reality of the animals begins to matter. Goats have a different coat. They lack the thick, insulating lanolin fleece of the sheep. If left out on the exposed hillside overnight in the freezing wind, the goats will freeze. They must be gathered together and led into a cave or a walled enclosure to survive the dark. The sheep, however, thrive in the open air. Their heavy wool demands the cool night wind. They cannot stay together in the dark. So, the shepherd steps into the middle of the flock. He does not ask them questions. He does not administer a test. He simply walks into the chaotic, bleeding mass of animals and begins to move. He touches one with his staff and nudges it to the left. He grabs another by the neck and pulls it to the right. Left. Right. He speaks of a wealthy landowner handing out bags of silver, turning his back, and disappearing for a long time. Parable after parable. The same rhythm repeats. He moves with practiced, rhythmic precision. The separation is not a random sorting. It is an exposure of nature. The darkness forces the shepherd to reveal what was already true in the light. The animals looked exactly the same while they were eating. They looked identical while they were walking, but the dropping temperature demands a division based on what they actually are on the inside, beneath the dust and the noise. Jesus borrows this exact, everyday agricultural reality. He paints a picture that every single person sitting on the Mount of Olives, that Tuesday evening, recognizes instantly. They have all felt the evening wind. They have all watched a shepherd step into a twilight flock to divide the identical bodies. But then Jesus uses a specific word to describe what the shepherd does next. And that single word unravels our entire theological courtroom. If you trace the ink of a first-century scribe scratching across a parchment scroll for Matthew chapter 25, verse 31, you find Jesus describing the exact moment the nations are gathered before the throne. He describes the action of the Son of Man with a very specific verb. He says he will separate the people one from another, just as a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. The word our English Bibles translate as separate is the Greek verb aphorizo. It is a compound word, built from two distinct pieces. A master leaves. A delay occurs. A sudden return forces a reckoning. Same pattern again and again. But it is the final image he offers that evening. The prefix is apo, meaning away from, and the root is horizo, meaning to establish a limit, to mark off, or to set a boundary. It is the exact word from which we get the English noun horizon, that visible line where the earth and the sky finally split. When you look at its usage across the ancient texts, aphorizo is rarely used for a chaotic, violent tearing apart. It is an intentional, boundary-defining action. Paul uses this exact same Greek verb in his letter to the Galatians when he says that God set me apart from his mother's womb. It is the act of drawing a definitive line in the sand, marking where one reality ends and another begins. If feeling the weight of these original words is shifting how you read texts you thought you knew, you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week, we dig past the English translations to find the bedrock underneath. So the Son of Man draws a horizon line. That route changes everything about how we picture the final judgment. We tend to imagine a furious deity hurling people to the left and to the right in a sudden outburst of divine anger. We picture a chaotic courtroom verdict being handed down at the last possible second, accompanied by the slamming of a heavy wooden gavel that haunts the human imagination. You know the scene. The Son of Man arrives in his glory, all the angels with him, and he sits on a throne. But aphorizo tells a different story. When the shepherd steps into the flock at twilight, he is not capriciously deciding which animal he likes best. He is simply recognizing the biological reality that already exists and drawing a boundary around it. The sheep and the goats have spent their entire lives making choices, growing different coats, responding differently to the biting cold of the evening wind. The shepherd is merely finalizing what the animals have already become. The judgment is not a sudden, violent rejection. It is the final, cosmic acknowledgement of the boundary you spent your entire life drawing. By the time you stand before the throne, the horizon line between you and God has already been established by 10,000 tiny, daily decisions. The Son of Man is simply making that invisible line visible to the entire universe. But here is where the parable takes its most controversial turn, because the boundary is not drawn based on how many times you attended a synagogue or how well you memorized the Torah. The dividing line is drawn over your response to a specific face hiding in the dirt. Look at the streets of first-century Jerusalem. A man lies by the pool of Bethesda, skin stretched tight over his ribs, paralyzed for 38 years. Before him are gathered all the nations, and he begins to divide the masses, pulling them apart the way a shepherd separates the sheep from the goats. A leper stands outside the city gates, wrapping rags over his ruined face, ringing a bell to warn the clean to stay away. A prisoner sits in a Roman dungeon beneath the Antonia fortress, shivering in the damp dark. waiting for a piece of bread that is not coming. These are not metaphors. They are living, breathing human beings, suffocating under the weight of the empire. When Jesus sits on the Mount of Olives and points to these specific people, he uses a very specific Greek word. He calls them the elachistos. It is the superlative form of the adjective elakos, which means small or short. Elakistos translates literally as the absolute smallest, the most insignificant, the ones of zero account, the ones society has actively decided to step over, to ignore, to erase. It is the exact same word Jesus uses earlier in Matthew to describe the mustard seed, something so tiny you brush it off your hand without a second thought. But here, he attaches this word to flesh and blood, to the hungry, to the naked, to the immigrant. And then he makes a claim that shatters the religious framework of the ancient world. He does not say he pities the elakistos. He does not say he loves the elakistos. He says he is the elakistos. Whatever you did for one of the least of these,